So today we're diving into this really radical idea. It comes from a pretty modern system of magic, and it suggests that your beliefs aren't really who you are. Instead, there's something you can change, something you can use, almost like swapping out software on your computer. Okay, let's get into it. So let's just start with that question right there. What if your most deeply held convictions, the stuff you think makes you you, weren't actually fixed? What if they were just tools in a toolbox? Things you could pick up for a specific job and then put down when you're done. It's a wild thought, right? But it is the absolute foundation for everything we're about to explore. So this whole thing has a name, paradigm shifting, and in chaos magic, it's considered the central skill. Now the key words here are deliberate and, maybe even more importantly, temporary. This isn't about finding a new religion for the rest of your life. It's about borrowing a worldview for a weekend, just to get something done. Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to really break down this idea of belief as a tool. Then, we'll look at the philosophical permission slip that kind of allows for all this. After that, we'll open up the actual toolkit, the how-to. Then we'll check out some really interesting parallels in psychology, and finally, we have to confront the very real risks involved. All right, our first section gets right to the heart of it. Belief as a tool, not as some absolute, capital T truth. And to really get this, you have to do some serious deconditioning from how most of us are taught to see the world. So the big idea here is that belief is this fluid, disposable thing. It's not a permanent part of who you are. In theory, someone who's really mastered this should be able to, say, fully and authentically believe in a specific religion one day, and then be a hardcore materialist atheist the next, all depending on which belief system is the most useful tool for the goal they're trying to achieve. So how on earth do you even justify a concept that radical? Well, you need an equally radical philosophy to back it up, and that's where we find what you could call the ultimate permission slip. And here it is. This is the famous, or maybe infamous, phrase that acts as the license for this entire practice. You see it pop up everywhere, often attributed to Hassani Sabah, made famous by William S. Burroughs, but its real meaning is almost always misunderstood. Now hold on. This is not, I repeat, not a get-out-of-jail-free card for bad behavior. It's not saying do whatever you want. It's a statement about cognitive freedom. It's basically saying, look, if no single map of reality is objectively true, then all maps, all belief systems become potentially valid. So the question stops being, is this true, and instead becomes, is this useful? And this idea didn't just pop up out of thin air. Way back in the early 20th century, an artist and occultist named Austin Osman Spare basically laid all the groundwork. He developed the core tech. Then, fast forward to the 1970s, in the middle of this punk rock counterculture scene in the UK, a couple of guys named Peter J. Carroll and Ray Sherwin took Spare's ideas and systematized them into what we now call chaos magic. And that DIY, results-only vibe is still at its core today. Okay, so that's the philosophy, the why. But what about the how? How does this actually work in practice? Let's open up the toolkit and see how you would actually go about doing this. The absolute engine driving all of this is a very specific state of mind called Gnosis. You can think of it as this moment of super intense, single-pointed focus where your conscious mind, that little internal critic, that psychic sensor that's always telling you, nah, that's impossible, is just silenced for a second. And in that brief moment of quiet, you can implant a new belief or an intention directly into your subconscious. And look, this might sound super mystical, but you've almost certainly been there before. Think about an athlete who's in the zone, or that runner's high, or a flow state where the world just kind of melts away. That's a form of gnosis. And there are different ways to get there. You can go the inhibitory route by quieting everything down, like in deep meditation. Or you can do the total opposite, the ecstatic path, and overload your senses with something like intense dancing. And then there's this third, more advanced way, indifferent vacuity, which is basically casting your intent when you're not even consciously thinking about it. So this all comes together in the quintessential chaos magic technique, sigilization. It's a pretty straightforward process. First, you state your goal very clearly. Then, you turn that statement into a weird abstract symbol, a sigil. Step 3, during that state of gnosis, you charge it. You basically just implant that symbol deep into your subconscious. And the final step is maybe the weirdest and the hardest. You have to deliberately forget about it. Let your subconscious do its thing without you constantly poking at it. I know, this all sounds pretty wild, but what's so fascinating is how much it actually lines up with some modern psychological concepts. This section is all about bridging that gap, about hacking your own mind. So let's compare it to something like cognitive reframing from cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Both are about changing your thought patterns, right? But, and this is a huge but, they're going in totally opposite directions. CBT wants to align your thoughts better with objective reality to help you function better. It's trying to fix a bug. Paradigm shifting, on the other hand, is about intentionally breaking away from consensus reality for a little while to get a result. It basically looks at the bug and says, hey, that's not a bug, that's a feature. Let's use it. And you can look at these techniques through a bunch of other psychological lenses too. A constructivist might say you're just actively reconfiguring a reality you were already creating anyway. You could also see it as kind of weaponizing cognitive dissonance. You create a mental conflict that your subconscious then scrambles to resolve in your favor. And the whole process of using Gnosis to implant a sigil, I mean, that looks an awful lot like self-hypnosis. Okay, now we need to take a step back and have a serious reality check. Because playing around with the foundations of your own mind, well, it's not a game. This level of mental fluidity isn't without some very real dangers. We have to talk about the psychological price tag. And the risks here are significant. They're the direct result of that deconditioning we talked about at the beginning. If you're constantly picking up and dropping core beliefs, you can literally start to erode your sense of a stable self, which can lead to dissociation. That phrase, nothing is true, if you really take it to its extreme, can trigger a full-blown existential crisis where nothing has meaning. And without some serious mental discipline, this freedom can just spiral into total mental chaos, a state of just jarring weirdness and confusion. And this isn't just a theory. This quote from a practitioner really brings the risk home. He said he became an idea of a person. He found that actually achieving his goals didn't bring him any joy or fulfillment. Instead, it led to this deep, profound depression where nothing mattered. It's a really stark warning about the hollowing out effect this can have. And this leads us to a really powerful philosophical critique of the whole thing. If you treat belief, something that for most people provides meaning and purpose and connection, as nothing more than a functional tool, you risk completely alienating yourself from authentic experience. This idea is sometimes called instrumental reason, where efficiency is the only thing that matters. And a system built only on that might be powerful, but it could also be incredibly unstable and ultimately empty. Which leaves us with this final, really challenging question. It's the central paradox of this entire system. If any belief can be picked up and used just to get a result, where does that leave authenticity? What is the value of a belief that you hold not because it's useful, but simply because to you it feels true?